I'm Mary Wing Soares, and I'm here again with Tim Thompson for another episode of Agenda Item. We missed you last month, and so we're eager to speak with you again this month. But once again, we're canceling our first meeting.
As circumstances would have it, we are faced with, again, no new applications being submitted for our first meeting of July, so our July 7th meeting has been canceled. And our July 14 meeting is actually relatively light this month as well. We have 3 items on the agenda, the first being a workshop discussion, continuing the discussion with the Planning Board about the number of units in multifamily buildings in our zoning ordinance. As you may recall, our Planning Board had a public hearing on this in June, tabled that due to concerns that were raised by the Elder Affairs Committee and members of the public. So we've tabled that ordinance. We're going back to talk about some options with the Planning Board as to how we can potentially move forward on this over the course of the next month or so to hopefully bring it back to a public hearing and eventually get this to the council.
Okay, and what's good about this is that it's the first item on the agenda.
Yes.
So that means that it will happen probably by 7:05 that we'll start talking about this item. So if people do want to come down and comment, we would encourage you to come. I know that at the Senior Center they have a petition, or not, it's not a petition, it's a survey type thing.
I just found out about that today, that I know that Sarah over at the Senior Center has put together some paperwork at the Senior Center up in the North Village so that anybody that is interested in this topic, has concerns, can express those so that members of the committee who will be attending the Planning Board meeting on the 14th will be able to relay those concerns to the Planning Board. Right,
and I know the reason she did this though was because the last time they weren't even able to speak until around 8:30 because we had a busier agenda.
Correct.
However, this time, since the agenda is so light and they are the first thing...
And I think, again, because this was a tabled public hearing and this was the first item that I knew was going to be on the agenda, that's why it came up first. And again, in accommodation of those that are attending the meeting, we are trying to put it up on the front of the agenda. Again, assuming there's a relatively small amount of administrative board work, there may be a few plans to sign, minutes to deal with. So I'd expect by, 7:15, 7:20, we'll probably be into this item on the agenda.
Right, and so I would encourage people to come not only to the Senior Center and look at that paperwork that Sarah's put together, but also come to our meeting and voice your opinion.
And basically what we're going to be doing in that meeting is I'll basically be covering where we were back on June 9th, talking about, this started again back in February when the Town Council adopted our workforce housing ordinance. The direction was sent back to the Planning Board to look at reducing the number of units per building for multifamily from 24 down to 16. Based on the advice of our legal counsel, because we're making that change for workforce housing, we also need to do it wherever we permit multifamily housing. So it impacts the workforce housing, our multifamily district, as well as elderly housing. So the public hearing that we held back in June was to amend those sections of the ordinance to set a maximum number of 16 units per building and to deal with some other things related to phasing of projects because of that change.
And though we were looking at the number 16, we didn't realize that it was going to have a consequence on this one particular project.
I think in this one particular case, I think this really crystallized it, I think, for the Planning Board. I know that both Andre and I, over the course of several months since February, have been trying to stress that this is not just a workforce housing issue. This does have impacts across the ordinance. But until you actually saw faces in the crowd, I don't think the Planning Board really realized the impact of the proposal that was moving forward that night. So what basically I'm going to be presenting to the board on July 14th is a variety of different options for each of the districts. Basically, there are 4 options that I see as staff, and based on our conversations with the legal counsel, we can leave the ordinances as they are today, leaving that number at 24 units per building. We can change it to 16, which is what was proposed at the public hearing on June 9th. We can revise it to a minimum of 20, which is, I think, the number that the elderly housing project on Sanborn Road was looking at. Or the Planning Board could develop a conditional use permit criteria process that could allow for an increase from that maximum of 16 that the council had asked for up to a maximum of 24, which is what the current ordinance states. And that would have to be done across the board for both, again, the inclusionary housing, which is our workforce housing ordinance, the R3 district, which is multifamily, and then elderly housing. And then lastly, those have impacts to our phasing ordinance, and there are a variety of different options the Planning Board could look at for phasing as well. But that's really the 4 options that we see as staff that we'll be presenting to the board, and we hope to have rigorous discussion as to which the best way to direction to
Okay,
move forward
well,
is.
one of the options that was brought up, though, at the last planning board meeting was the option of looking at the size of the unit itself.
Staff is going to not recommend moving forward in that direction for the pure reason that administration and enforcement of that type of provision in our ordinance structure would be extremely difficult. Building codes define building size and unit size one way, zoning codes could define it a different way. That leaves a lot of interpretation, and given the history of the way our ordinances worked, it's not being recommended by both staff, and in our initial discussion with legal counsel, though we haven't discussed it deeply with him, he had concerns about moving in that direction as well. So as far as our recommendations to the board, we're not putting that option on the table, but it is still something the board could consider if they wish to.
And that was one of the questions we had asked you to do, was to speak with legal counsel, ask if it was defendable, and while you haven't gone into depth, you don't feel it's
That's
something
something
you want
that's
to
going to be
recommend.
taking place between now and then. Our main legal counsel has been on vacation for the last several weeks, so he just came back, and
Okay.
I expect to be talking with him over the course of the next 2 weeks.
All right. Okay, and then what else do we have on the agenda?
The other two items on the agenda, we're going to have some representatives from the Hampshire Department of Transportation. Part of the I-93 widening project is some mitigation along South Road that it requires some work with our Conservation Commission, so they wanted to come in and update the Planning Board as to what's going on with that project as it relates to the widening of 93. And then the last item on our agenda is David Priest, the Executive Director of the Southern New Hampshire Regional Planning Commission, wanted to come in and update the board on some of the projects that the Commission is working on this summer and into the next year.
Okay. Now, does the mitigation have anything to do with the little area that's always dumped on South Road?
I believe so. I'm not specifically sure. They've been working primarily through our Public Works Department at this point, but I expect that they'll be able to answer that question on the 14th.
All right, well, that might be something that other people are interested in as well, specifically because that has been a dumping ground. And I've noticed that they've put dirt there, which to me now just means that there's a mound where people can put things behind. So, if that is something that they're involved with, we can get some questions answered.
That's the time they ask those questions.
Right.
The other thing that has started, and we're hoping to utilize this program for in the next couple of months, is our capital improvements plan process has also started. We had our first committee meeting a week or two ago, and moving forward, we're hoping to help with the public participation and public awareness part of our capital improvements program by bringing in that project into this program so we can help discuss and help people get an understanding as to how our capital process works and how the planning board and the council and school board work towards planning those over the course of the next 6 years.
And we do have our presentation meeting scheduled.
The presentation meeting scheduled, I believe, is going to be August 18th. It's going to be likely in the school board conference room due to some scheduling conflicts with the Moose Hill room. Will be televised on local access as well as open to the public. Typically, that meeting in August is after all the departments, boards, and committees have given their projects to me. I coordinate with our finance department, with the school business administrator, program those in, develop what the cost impacts, the tax impacts are for those projects. They're discussed. Major projects, usually those that are of cost of greater than $1 million, are presented to the committee that evening, and then the committee will then deliberate, score, and place those projects into the program over the next 6 years.
Now, this is going to be my first experience there throughout the process. I mean, you always do a great job presenting it after the fact, but now I'm part of the committee, and I'm excited to be part of the committee. Everything that we do will be in public, though,
Absolutely.
right?
Every meeting, all the information, anybody who has interest or questions about the process are certainly welcome to contact me. But again, the process is the initial meeting took place where we elected our chair, put out our schedule and the priorities of what the committee wants to look for in the plan itself. We meet again in August to actually have the presentations on the projects and score and rate those projects. From that point, what I will do, along with the business administrator and the finance director, is put together the actual spreadsheet, the tax impacts, the debt schedules, all those things that go into that, put together a draft plan that will be presented to the planning board in September. At our second meeting of September, workshop discussion to work with the planning board to determine if they want to see any changes. And then ultimately that'll then move to a public hearing with the planning board for the second Wednesday in October. Usually at that meeting the board adopts the plan, and then it then gets passed on to the school board and to the town council.
Now, one of the topics that came up at our first meeting, though, was the idea of stabilizing the debt rate so that we wait until something comes off the debt before we even consider putting something back on the debt.
That's something that has been discussed in the past by the CIP committee, and in the past they've opted not to make that recommendation specifically in the plan itself, feeling that it was a policy decision best handled by the council and the school board. This year, the committee, I think, is looking at putting a debt schedule specifically into the plan so people know what bonds are on the schedule, what's coming off, how long we still have to pay on certain projects that have been approved in the past. Excuse me. And to make a recommendation of some sort to the council and the school board as to how they bond projects in the future so that that debt schedule and the amount that the town and the school district is paying for debt is stabilized over the long term.
And in bringing this forward, we're not suggesting as a CIP committee that just because something's come off that we go ahead and spend that money because we want to keep everything level. It's simply we want to inform people what debt we have, what the schedule is, what's coming off, and what is planned for the future.
And it's always important to realize that a capital improvements plan is just that. It's a plan. It doesn't hold the force of law. It's recommendations from the planning board to the governing bodies of both the school district and the town to what the recommended priorities are. The ultimate decisions as to what gets funded and what projects happen still lies with the council, the school board, and then ultimately the voters of the town at town meeting.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for being with us again, Tim. And until the next time, this is Mary Wing Soares, and this has been Agenda Item.